Today we're talking about how I handle my photo backups when I'm traveling. So a question I see a lot is, how do you handle photo backups while you're traveling, especially for multi-day trips? If you've traveled a fair amount of distance and it's a multiple day trip, you may get worried about how do you make sure your photos make it home safely, just in case something should happen, like a lost bag, theft, or corruption, or anything like that. So that's what we're going to look at today. So my strategy has evolved over the years, and it used to be I used a laptop, and I really just sort of mimicked what I did at home. I tended to carry a laptop with me even on multi-day trips. I'd have my card reader, I could have an SSD drive, and I'd be able to make backups of my photos using my laptop. However, as time has gone on, I've tried to work down on lightening my loads, slimming things down, just making it a little bit more portable. So my current backup strategies really come down to just a few key tools that we're going to take a look at. Now, as we go through my setup, keep in mind, this is just what's been working for me. It's what I'm currently using. I do tend to adapt, change, tweak. So in 6 months, a year, this may change yet again. And that's not to say this is the best way, but it is the solution that I use, and it has worked well for me. This is the solution I used when I traveled to Rocky Mountain National Park back in January. It's what I used when I went to Death Valley back in March. And it's what I use for any kind of trip where I've traveled multiple days and just want to be sure I have backups of my photos. So for most of the cameras I shoot, whether it be my Nikons or even my Panasonic G9, I tend to like to have cameras that have dual card slots. That's important to me because it just makes some of this even simpler. And for a lot of my shorter trips, I really just rely on the dual card slots. For example, this G9, it has 2 SD card slots in it. So I can configure the cameras when it photographs and put an image on SD card 1, put it on SD card 2, and then if I'm traveling and want to separate things out, I can pop my second memory card out, just put it someplace else different, safely, secure, and I'm protected from a lot. And that is the solution I tend to use for my shorter trips where maybe it's only 1 night or 2 nights or a short weekend or where I haven't traveled a super long distance. But for bigger trips where I have more of an investment in the trip, both time and money and everything like that, I do prefer to have 3 copies of my images just to be super safe and secure that my images make it back home. And that's where this solution that we're going to look at now comes in. Now, I used to use a laptop. Like I said, I really just sort of mimicked my home setup on the road, took my laptop, had the card readers, had an SSD drive, and the whole bit. So when looking to trim down from carrying a laptop, I sort of gravitated towards an iPad. Something just like this. And when the iPad Pro started using USB-C ports, it started to open up some options for me to do the backups. I tend to want to have something that I can do email on with a decent keyboard and things like that, just because of the photography business, I do have emails to respond to, inquiries to respond to, and having that sort of home away from home is nice. But the iPad packs up super small. I feel like it's pretty robust and a little bit more tolerant of being tossed in a bag and sort of banged around a little bit. So I sort of gravitate towards the iPad. So with the iPad Pros having USB-C ports, that's when I sort of moved my whole solution over to no longer carrying a laptop on travel and just carrying the iPad Pro. Now the iPad Pro has a USB-C port, which let me get a USB-C hub, something like this. What this does is this plugs into the USB-C port of the iPad and gives me 4 more USB-C ports. So then that opens me up to be able to use a card reader, something like this CF Express reader, or what we're going to demo with today, this SD card reader, and I can plug this into the USB-C hub and I've got 1 connection. So this is how I read my memory cards from the camera. I can read my CF Express cards, I can read my SD cards, I can read the micro SD cards that need the adapters to fit in, but it gives me a lot of flexibility to be able to copy files from any of the cameras that I'm working with. Now, of course, I need to copy those files somewhere. Sometimes on longer trips, I would get nervous about my iPad necessarily having enough storage space, especially if I've been doing several trips in a row. So I still sort of like the idea of having an SSD drive to be able to copy to, and that's where I work in, and I've talked about these kinds of drives before. I tend to use these a lot in my workflow. This is a Samsung T7 drive. This is probably my main go-to drive these days. Packs up small and very flexible, versatile. You get them obviously all sorts of different sizes, 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, 4 terabyte, so lots of options. So I tend to use an SSD drive, but there's nothing wrong with one of the SanDisk drives either. I also have some of these around, and that tends to be what goes. So what that brings me down to is for my backup solution is I have my iPad Pro, I have the USB-C hub, I have the card readers I need, whether it be SD card or CF Express, those go with me, and an SSD drive. So this whole setup packs down small and is pretty lightweight. The iPad serves the need of being able to have a pretty much real computer to take care of any kind of business related things I need to do. Maybe I need to send a newsletter, maybe I need to update some social media, maybe I need to do some work on a YouTube video. The iPad Pro sort of takes care of all of that. So I sort of want that extra computing power, so I'm going to be taking it anyways. So if I can incorporate it into this backup workflow, it works out really well for me. So let's walk through making copies of these files real quick and how I do that, and then we'll talk about how I carry these files back home, where do I keep these devices, and how do I try to keep them safe on the way home. Okay, so first up I take the USB-C hub and I plug it into the USB-C port on the iPad Pro. So now I have additional ports to plug in my SD card readers, my CF Express readers, and my SSD drive. So we're going to be working with the SD card reader today, so let's go ahead and grab the card from the camera, plug the card into my reader, and then we're going to attach my reader to my USB-C hub. So now the iPad can see that card. So now I am able to retrieve the files from my cameras. Again, this works for my Nikon cameras, my G9, my GoPro, my drone. I'm able to use these readers just like I would at home, but use the iPad as sort of the copying brains, the copying device. Now, like I said, I worry about running out of space on the iPad Pro, so I use an external SSD drive just to be sure I have them in a safe place with plenty of storage as I need it. So we're just going to grab the SanDisk drive right here, plug it into the USB-C hub. And now connected to the iPad, I have the reader and the SSD drive. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy the files from the SD card, could be the CF Express card or any kind of card reader that you're reading from, and I'm going to copy them to the SSD drive. So let's take a look at the iPad and see what I actually do there. Okay, so on the iPad, I tend to just use the Files app. There are some other apps out there that let you do this, but as Apple's iOS has evolved, the Files app sort of works good enough for me. I'm really just trying to do a file copy here and move forward from there. So I've got my Files app here, and I open it up, and as you can see over here on the left side, I have the Lumix reader, which is the memory card for my G9, and then I have the Extreme SSD, which is my external SSD drive that I'm going to copy the files to. So what I can do is I am going to go into the Lumix. It's going to read the card, and I'm just browsing into the card just like I would anything else. I'm going to copy all of these files over, so we're going to do select all. Now I have all my files selected, and they do sort of hide the copy option. It's down here underneath more. We're going to copy 414 items. Now I'm going to click over into my Extreme SSD drive. I'm going to create a backup folder. So I create a new folder, call it backup. Click into my backup folder. We're going to do one more subfolder. We're just going to call it G9. These are from July, so we'll call it July 23. Then I'm going to come in here, folder's empty. I'm just going to paste these files in here. So we're going to tap in there. Paste is one of my options. Going to choose paste. You can see it start to do the file copy prep, and it's going to copy all 400 plus files from that memory card to the SSD drive. When the file copy is done, I now have my photos on that SD card and the external SSD. I am now up to 3 places for my files. The camera had 2 memory cards in it, shooting to both, so the same file exists on card 1 and card 2, and I'm now creating a 3rd copy of my files. Now this can be a little slower depending on which setup you have in here. There's a couple places where your I/O speed, your transfer speed can be a little slow. I sort of use a cheaper USB-C hub, which I believe is the slower point in my process. My SD card reader is not the fastest. It can be if I use the CF Express reader that I have, it is a little faster when I'm copying off the main Nikon card, and then the SSD drives are usually slow, but just be aware, it's not necessarily the fastest thing. This total right here is around 10 gigs, just under 10 gigs, and it's going to go reasonably quick to get through there. And we just watch the progress bar up here at the top of the screen. Scroll through here, see how it's doing. You can see down here at the bottom, it's doing the thinking motion here with a little circle. That's just sort of what you want to watch out for. You don't want to disconnect until the files are all copied. But there's the indicator at the top of the screen, and then you can see it as it sort of works through right there that it finished copying those files. So just be sure to don't start unplugging things too fast. It may be a little slower than you're used to if you're using a high-speed laptop or anything like that at home. So just be aware of that. Make sure those files get completely copied before you start disconnecting. You can see there at the top, this one's almost done. And we just scroll down through here. Like I said, the file copy progress bar at the top is gone, and we're looking pretty good. Maybe spot check a file or two. We've got a JPEG here as well. We'll pop that open. JPEG opens fine, I'm looking pretty good, and I'm happy. So that's it. That's how I copy my files. Again, this is the process I used in Rocky Mountain National Park to back up my photos. Made backups before I got on the plane to fly back to Ohio. Same with Death Valley. Made backups of the photos before I flew back, so I had the images in 3 separate locations. So let's talk about how I travel with those 3 copies of those files once they're made. So there are essentially 3 big things I'm trying to protect against when I've made all of these copies. One is corruption of the data, corruption of a single memory card, or some sort of weird camera corruption, corrupting 2 cards before I get home. Not a very likely possibility since I'm shooting with 2 memory cards, but I still like to have that 3rd copy just in case. The other item is theft. Here I am walking around, maybe taking an Uber or traveling or walking from place to place within the airport, and potentially a target of theft. I've got a camera bag, it might be a little obvious, so I want to make sure if someone steals my camera bag, I don't lose all the data as well. And then finally, just lost bags in general. There's checked luggage, sometimes it goes missing. There's, again, a bag going missing in an airport. So I'm just trying to protect against that. With 3 copies of the data, I have several options and ways to carry this so that any one of those is not apt to cause me data loss. For the first card, I tend to just leave it in the camera. I leave 1 card in the camera, it's going to be in the camera bag, and I'll know where it's at, and it's relatively safe. I've not had a camera bag stolen, so in most cases, I feel like I'm going to be okay with that. If you're really paranoid, there is the risk that your camera bag gets stolen, but in this case, you're just going to lose out 1 copy of the data because I'm not keeping the other 2 in the camera bag. The second memory card I tend to take out, and I like to carry it on my person if I can. I tend to wear shorts with cargo pockets or pants with cargo pockets, so I have lots of little places to stash it, little zippered compartments that are away from my wallet and away from my keys that I don't think anyone would really give me a hard time about. So I tend to like to carry those in my pocket. So I'll take that second card out of 1 camera, multiple cameras, put them in a little, protective case, and then carry those with me. So now I have them directly with me. If the camera bag gets lost, forget it in the Uber or something like that, I still have a copy of the stuff directly with me and I can sort of protect those. So that 3rd copy of data is typically going to be on the SSD drive, and it's all going to be on 1 drive. And what I do with that one depends on how I'm traveling. If I'm traveling with somebody, usually it's going to be my wife, and I will give her the SSD drive, and it'll usually go maybe in her personal carry-on, or it'll be somewhere that she keeps relatively close to her, sort of stashed away. So that sort of keeps that 3rd copy relatively safe. If I'm traveling by myself, I'll tend to stick that SSD drive into the checked baggage, just trying to get that separation of my data being all centered on me. Because if I have the 1 in the camera bag and the 1 on me, it'd be rare that I'd lose those 2, but I don't want the 3rd copy with me. I feel like I want it a little bit further away from me. So then it would go into the checked baggage. Now, with checked baggage, there's always the risk it gets lost. Now, luckily, in most of my experiences, I've not ever truly had a bag completely lost. Maybe delayed, didn't make the connecting flight or something like that, but I've not had the bag completely lost. In the event that luck's really against me and that bag gets lost, I did lose an SSD drive. However, I should still have the card that's in my camera and the one I personally carried with me, so I feel like I'm still pretty safe from that standpoint. So those are the 3 locations and how I tend to carry that data back home. So that's it. That's how I make my backups when I'm on the road. It's worked out pretty well for me. Like I said, this is very much a changing, evolving setup for me. What I use today could be completely different in 6 months to a year, just depending on how things go. So like I said, I'm not trying to say this is the perfect way to do it, but I know I like to hear how other people are doing things, so this is how I'm doing it currently. And I'd love to hear down in the comments, what are you doing when you travel? When you take that long weekend that you've flown for, how are you protecting your data to get back? I would love to hear what your strategy is. If you're doing a 3-copy strategy like me, where are you carrying yours? Do you think the checked bag is stupid and you've got a better place for that 3rd one? Maybe you mail that one home or something. I would love to hear what you're doing for your backups down in the comments. So hop down there and let me know what you're doing. So if you found today's video helpful, be sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see future landscape photography content from me, including tips, tricks, behind the scenes, mini gear reviews, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any landscape photography content from me in the future. And thank you for watching.